All right, thank you. So the first item on the agenda is Community Benefits Scheme Partnerships from Gary.
Gary's online. He's just connecting in now, I think. So. Always having issues, one or the other.
We are flexible. Dave, do you want to lead off with dump points?
Yeah, so share screens. Okay, this is just a bit of an overview of dump points, and I suppose looking for, well, I suppose, a bit of guidance in relation to where we're at due to a petition that came in about Wongalla. What did the group change? So basically, looking at RV dump points across the current locations, you can see the list there on the left-hand side. Obviously, we have some issues at some of them now with the Haythorpe Reserve, which is still flood damaged. The one we put in at Manor Mobile and the public toilet precinct, which will be connected to sewer very shortly. There's one at Cadell, which is at the recreation area, which is under the overall lease. And just for elected members' purposes, obviously there's been a request for one at Walker Flat at Swamp Hen, and there has only been a proposal by way of a comment on a association minute, the particular association minutes, that they're looking at potentially a RV dump point at Tunkilo. So just to give a bit of guidance as to where we're at with dump points and a bit of a cost. Admittedly, at the Bohu RV dump point, which was done several years ago, there was a little bit of extra work that had to be done to run extra water into the site and a bit of landscaping so that the RV access could be done. And given that all the work that was put together approximately 5 years ago through the district action plan process, it was estimated, or it was actually the accounts came back in about $39,000 to fully activate that site as an RV dump point. The Manor Mobile one, the second dot point there, we actually put that in because of obviously with the flood, and eventually we'll be connecting that through the Play Your Way grant, connecting that to full sewer, and that'll be retained as an RV dump point as well. So obviously we're going to have on costs there. The matter we've got with Manor Oval is because it goes into SA Water effluent and not our septics, is that SA Water by stipulation either have to have a CCTV to monitor the usage or a logbook to fill in so it records the amount of usage, because then obviously they're paying for the full sewage and it's a community dump point. So just giving that some consideration for anyone for that one at Manor. The maintenance costs in regards to the ongoing works with dump points. Obviously, we get a mammoth amount of blockages. There's a lot of inappropriate disposals. We do get adult nappies, wet wipes, and a few other things. And when they do go through the pumps, they collect up and clog up the system, so to speak. And just as an example, we had a blockage. Someone had dumped the lid of their cassette into the Manor dump point. And in 6 weeks, we couldn't work out why, but we had 9 blockages. And basically, every time we had a call out, it was about $500 a visit to pump it out and to try to fix it. We fixed it now with a riser and able to now get in and clear that system out. So they are, I suppose, very reactive, and there is quite a bit of maintenance that is required to keep them going. So, as stated, there are foreign objects and blockages that occur with dump points, and basically what they do is they go into a septic and either we pump the septic out when they become full, or they will be in another system which is pumped out and through a macerator pump and then goes to an irrigation site, same as what a normal toilet would do. So there's a couple of different disposal methods of the effluent. The chemical that's disposed of when they dump the cassette is actually a chemical that kills the bacteria, and when you put it into the septic, it actually kills the bacteria, and we have to restock the bacteria to keep the septic activated. So there is I suppose, differential about the disposal that goes into a septic tank, and that when the more use there is, the less bacteria there is in the septic tank, which makes the septic tank less effective. Also, with the RV dump points, there is a requirement to have a separate water access, so they have clean fill. And we've noticed and had photos of people taking theft from those taps, filling up IBCs and so forth from those areas. And obviously, If there is no dump point, and we've had this on many occasions, and it was always up at the Manor Mobile, where they just took the cassettes and flushed them down the toilets and blocked the toilets. So they do, the dump points serve a purpose, but when they're not available, they do have other issues. So looking at the current requests, Walker Flat, Swamp End, which is the result of the petition, because there are already maintenance issues with the toilet, and we work through those as we are able to make allocations, because there's some maintenance issues that we need to work through. But we're probably assuming that with Walker Flat, probably need another separate septic with a macerator system, which obviously then requires electric and water pump and everything being monitored. Because of the closeness of the road and the car park, we'd obviously have to modify the driveway access to be improved. And honestly, what I just said, the current septic and public toilet pipe requires improvements. We have had a very rough estimate after the petition to find out what all that would be worth, and without the driveway and roadway improvements to a significant value, it was only superficial, was about $40,000. And with the Tunkillo, whilst it's only been an initial inquiry as to what it would cost to put a dump point in the town, it's only been proposed by the community. But I suppose when you look at Tunkillo, there isn't a lot of open space or RV parking facilities. So I suppose that's where we need to set some service levels or criteria as to how they're applied. Just showing you Swamp End. On the left-hand side, there is a rock boundary. The toilet and the septic is in behind there by about probably 10-15 metres. People drive in and around that area and then drive in and come back up and around to the right and park. So obviously if an RV is dumped there to fill and dispose, then there's going to be some congestion driving around that car park. So there is some minor modifications that need to be done to Swamp End. And admittedly, we do have issues at Swamp End with illegal disposal. So it does make common sense to have a RV dump point there. But talking to a staff member today, apparently many years ago, they talked to the Caravan Motorhome and Caravan Association, and they basically said that if you wanted one there, you need to fund it yourself, because we already had quite a few as it was, but I don't know if that's still the same story. So with that, I suppose there's quite a few questions, rather than questions from the floor. I suppose where we're looking at is what council wants to provide for us is, are there enough dump points currently? And what locations do we wish, and do we wish to extend any more dump points? What's council's future strategy for camping and dump point provision? And I suppose what criteria, what service level we have, is it where public toilets and campgrounds are? And then obviously how we're going to fund this process. So it's probably a bigger picture item for council. But if you're looking at giving any guidance, that would probably be the level of questioning that we would pose. And with that, that's my last slide on that.
Can we go back to the first with the list of the dump points, just so that we can answer?
Probably good to see that slide on a map as well, if it came if it comes back to council, Dave.
Yes, yeah, agreed. It was difficult to do that initially, just with the short time we had. But yeah, I suppose when you start looking at that, they are very much river based and tourism orientated, except for the Truro. But obviously there's a pull to maybe put something elsewhere in the camping areas. So there is probably a need at a broader region to have dump points considered.
Dave, do you have issues at Palmer? Because obviously they get a lot of campers. How does it go there without the dump point?
I'm not sure. I don't know whether they go and use it and flush it down the toilet. I would say that's what they do. I have actually seen them take a cassette across to the toilet, so I assume it actually goes down and is flushed through that process.
But you haven't had problems with the public toilet or anything there?
Not that I've had given to me firsthand, but I can actually take that on notice and see if there has been any other issues at Palmer.
That'd be good to know, just because we do know that they get a fair few caravans. Ongoing maintenance, so obviously 40K investment for Walker Flat. What would be the ongoing maintenance cost? Unknown, is it?
Well, generally, I suppose we pump out septics depending on the amount of use the septics have. But there's quite a few septics or holding tanks that are actually connected to sewer. So they're basically self-managed. I suppose we pumped out the septic, all the septics at public toilets before Christmas. And then we had to pump them out, like we have water overflows, so we got to pump them out again and fix the water flows. So it may not be necessarily effluent. Generally, it's probably say 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a year, based on the amount of volumes that go through the toilets. Generally, when you have a plumbing issue, we have to pump out the toilet anyway, so it counteracts a reactive pump out. So any pump out like that's probably worth anywhere between, say, given geographical distance out of it, probably anywhere up to about, say, I think it's about $500 to $700 to do your pump outs. And then there's the reactive stuff, which our general crews will have to go back to do when there's minor plumbing issues. So I suppose just trying to highlight the Manor one where we went back 9 times, I think, in 6 weeks through a blockage, and it ranged from anywhere between, I think, $300 to $900 with every visit. So on average, that's about $500 for the visit per visit.
Do we feel that there are any black spots where people have a long way to travel before they can get to a dump point in the region?
You'd probably find that if someone thought they had to travel 2 kilometres, it would be a distance to get to a dump point. I suppose the Wongalla and Walker Flat, as a result of the petition, is heavily utilised by campers. So that would make sense to look at putting one in there, and that starts to head them down in the southern part of the council area, where there's obviously predominantly quite a few in the northern area of the council. So the Wongalla area would make a lot of sense to consider that one, given the efforts of the local community there in trying to keep the place clean and the practicality of the camping area.
Hey, what about funding availability?
Funding availability is normally through the CMCA, the Caravan Motorhome Camping Association. Normally what they do is they would provide you with a lid and potentially the signs. They provide the lid. We then are required to install all the signs, and then from that point on, we maintain it from there on in. We are probably pretty lucky with Truro. They do a fair bit of maintenance up there, and obviously Cadell will look after their own maintenance in their own forms. But the remainder of those other ones, we've had to do a lot of work to some. I mean, the one at the Morgan, the adjacent club rooms, we've had some issues with with blockages outside the septic. So whatever's gone through the septic into the seepage area. So we've obviously had some other issues there, but not predominantly because of the RV dump point. It's more so the usage of that site.
You've had water stolen from there too. A lot. Not from the tap at the dump point.
Yeah.
My concern is that for the amount of money and the usage is not our ratepayers using it, so it would be ratepayers' money funding this and the ongoing maintenance. We have issues with maintaining what we've got for our ratepayers. And the compliance sort of side of things, notoriously people, no, not everybody is disrespectful of it, but it only takes a few to damage it and also cost us more for providing a service, which is really unfortunate. Unless we can get funding from another source, but then you've still got the ongoing maintenance side of things, which will always be an issue.
So I suppose, Councillor McGregor, the offset of that is that it's meant to attract people to the region who are going to spend money. That's not always the case, because sometimes self-sufficient people don't spend a lot of money, but that is the intent. Obviously, if you've got these, you've got tourists coming in, which does benefit the rate base.
If I could just add to the problems that we actually have with dump points, I suppose we actually have a similar scenario up at the parking bay up at here at Manham on the corner of Ridley, which is a DIT parking bay. We've also had illegal dumping where people just dispose of the same products on the side of the road. So it's not only associated with dump points. There are I suppose some very obscene things that they get dumped on the side of the road through this sort of process.
You know, I'm not sure that adding extra dump points would, or removing any, would necessarily change that much. Neither the theft, just less opportunity maybe, and neither the theft nor the illegal dumping. If people decide they don't want to drive, as you say, for 10 minutes down the road, then they're going to behave that way. So, you know, I'm not quite sure what we're trying to achieve with this discussion. Are we wanting to cut back the budget for it? Should it be in the tourism budget? If it, you know, given that it is a clear focus on tourists, you know, should it be separated out as a part of the tourism budget? Yeah, I'm not quite sure what we're trying to achieve. Sorry.
The question, the purpose of the discussion is whether there's an appetite from council to invest in further dump points across the region, given we've had a deputation or submissions to increase or add other dump points in the region.
My response would be no at the moment, personally. I mean, you know, we can obviously have more of a discussion at council, but my gut feeling is I'd feel like I'd need to be persuaded that there's actually a very clear need for more, and if there were, then it would be subject to additional funding, in my view, if we're going to stick to our sustainability approach.
Yeah, I'd like to see 100% funded through a grant or community partnership, or no, unfortunately.
At this point in time, I think we're probably better off just leaving it as is, and when this council's in a bit better financial position, then reconsider it.
I've had a lot of feedback from the Walk Flat Progress Association, and I'm assuming they're the ones that have put the petition forward. They've told me this has been an ongoing issue for them for the last 2 or 3 years. They've been trying to get something happening. And last time I spoke to them, I said, is there any way that there's any funding that they could apply for to help cover the costs of implementing the dump point? Because going by their feedback, it is a pretty big issue out of that area. They do have a lot of tourists there, and yeah, the public toilet system doesn't cope with that, and end up with lots of mess everywhere from when they do have the campers in.
Other feedback, I guess, if that community is having issues, could we have a really nice clear sign? You know, there was dumping on Ram Road, and I was very surprised that one little sign explaining illegal dumping, or, you know, whatever, it stopped. So whether we just need a really clear sign about where the next point is or something like that to try and get people to do the right thing might be a more budget wise.
Same thing, Simone.
Just a different type of illegal dumping.
We don't have cameras anywhere, do we? We don't have cameras any of our dump points, do we? Because then we'd sort of get those people who are using them inappropriately. But of course, that's an expense too. But even a sign that maybe you're being filmed, I don't know.
I think we might have just put one in, Dave, at Manham because of SA water compliance. Is that right?
Correct. There's one at SA Water now, and basically it's there to meet the compliance, but we don't monitor it. We can go back and review it. But then there's also the element of whether they're disposing of it, what you want to actually capture, how they're disposing it, and then obviously the rego. So there's you actually got to have a couple of different cameras to capture the rego, then capture what they're actually doing, and whether that is actually the one that's disposing of things inappropriately, because the viewing might not be flash.
Look, I apologise, I can't see everyone online, so if you do have something to say, then please just yell out, because I haven't got your view. Are there any questions or comments from anyone that hasn't contributed?
Can I just add something, Ben? Sorry, Vic, only a second. Can I just ask if there are sites which are not where the RV dump sites are, where illegal dumping is happening, then it would be good to get a costing on signage at these places where it's happening more than once. You know what I mean? Where if it's a common dumping place, then maybe that's where the signage about illegal dumping could go. But I don't know what that would cost.
Thank you. I'll take that on board. Was there someone else that was started speaking? Sorry.
It's me, Victoria. I was just going to say that, yes, I agree that a sign would be a good idea in those areas where there isn't a dump point. Maybe not just an illegal dumping sign, but more like just advising them where our local dump spots are, where their nearest one is from that location. Like if there's areas where there's massive offences going on, we could sort of guide them to the nearest dump point from some better signage. Dog barking, sorry about that.
And I think that, you know, I mean, if you could go the expense of having cameras up, but whether you're going to capture anything to be able to not accost them, but to follow through and slap them with some infringement, because the cassettes, they take them out of their van and they can sort of walk over to the dump point, and yeah, and they'll be on their way. They'll be at the next free campsite before we even have that sort of data thing. So it's a lot of money for yeah, where we can't really get anything. We'll know that they've dumped something, but yeah, we won't have any other information.
You would think it would still be a deterrent though, even if it wasn't even a real camera. If you had signs up there saying, you know, under surveillance or something, surely that would still be a deterrent. You would hope that they would, you know, hopefully do the right thing, but just a thought.
What I was just going to quickly add is regarding the signage. Unfortunately, if we don't have the budget to police it with compliance officers, people are just going to ignore the signs anyway, as we're seeing throughout the whole district in other matters.
I thought the same thing, Jeff, but the little sign on Ram Road has actually stopped all the illegal dumping. I can't believe it.
Yep.
Look, we'll take that on board, Dave. So some guidance there. What I'm hearing is potentially self-funded, maybe some signage opportunities for where there's an issue. But report come back. Obviously, there's a desire for something at Wall Flat. So yeah, give that some consideration in a report.
Walker Flat.
Walker Flat, sorry. Any other comments for anyone else? I'm already 13 minutes behind schedule. So we'll move on to Gary, to Community Benefit Schemes Partnership. Carol, swap the slide deck.
That's right, I'll be sharing my screen.
Okay, Gary. Now, I'm not going to steal any thunder or
sure?
anything that's happened, Gary. So hand over to you.
No, thank you. And thank you, elected members. So the purpose of this presentation is actually just to show you a proposed outline of a partnership with our renewable companies with their community benefit programs. This presentation, the actual target audience is those companies. So you're sort of seeing it from their perspective. You know, when if you support this concept, it's for me to sort of go and meet with the respective companies to sort of gauge their interest in collaborating around their community benefits. The Mayor, Mandy and Kirsty and myself, Natalie, Dawn, were actually at a workshop last week with Tilt Renewables regarding the Palmer Wind Farm and the communities of Palmer, Tunkillo, Mount Pleasant and Co. to work through their community benefit plan. And I spoke to Owen from Tilt Renewables and just sort of flagged with him the notion of partnership. So yeah, I'll walk you through this presentation with the notion that this is to present to the actual renewable companies. So the first thing, obviously, what I want to try to do is sort of connect the community benefit programs of the renewable companies with our community development strategy to show that there's an opportunity for the renewables to support council and support community in driving the new strategy. So that will be one of the key objectives, you know, looking at our service functions as a council, and where, you know, there's connections between what they're trying to achieve with their community benefit and what we're trying to achieve with our community and council services. So effectively, the partnership concept is obviously looking at, you know, how council, renewables and the community can work together to maximise the benefit that these community benefit programs will provide. So each company effectively will have their own program. So the idea is to sort of how we can sort of build that partnership. So if you look at the council now and the renewable projects, you can see that we have, you know, 2 wind farm proposals either within or near the council boundary. So we've got the Palmer Wind Farm at Palmer Tunkilla, and we've got Twin Creek Wind Farm, which is predominantly Kapunda Udunda, but there is a connection point running past Truro. We've got the Manum Solar, and then we've got a number of battery sites, Summerfield, Manum, Tunkillo, Harrogate, Barker and Dinley. And we also have an upgrade to the Tunkillo substation, which in effect does not have a community benefit associated with it. But it's just worth noting that this is the extent of current projects that do occur within the Mid-Murray Council area. So what we're trying to do, obviously with the community development strategy, we're now working across, you know, 9 planning areas and developing 9 community action plans. So with that in mind, you know, in terms of how the strategy works, looking at how then the community benefits that these companies have, there are communities of benefit. So they effectively are targeting those areas around their projects and the communities around their projects. So if you look at our 9 regions, then effectively there are 4 regions that will be receiving some level of community benefit, and then a number of regions that effectively won't. So, you know, and with these projects, and again, like with Tilt Renewable last week, they spoke about how, you know, they were working on a concept of working within a set kilometre of the boundary of the project. So arguably, you know, depending on what radius around the project they put, it might mean that, you know, Region 8 only benefits, or parts of Region 8 and potentially, you know, in the Manum region as well. And then there are parts of Barossa and potentially Adelaide Hills that may also receive some of that community benefit. So again, understanding each of the different community benefits and how they work is going to be important to then sort of see how we can collaborate. So effectively, the current model is that you have these individual community benefits working independently and working with those communities that do operate, where we, you know, as a council can sort of help influence that now is through the community action plans. So by the current district action plans, there are a number of projects that are identified, and a lot of the companies look at those action plans to facilitate some of the deliverables that the community benefit may bring, depending on how they wish to operate. With the community action plans, that too will give the renewable companies a sense of what they could achieve working with their communities. So that's effectively, you know, the model that most of the companies will be working towards. Again, as I said, there are then communities that don't benefit from that. So a second model that could work is to try to have all the companies redirect themselves into some collective fund, which then we can utilise to, through the action plans, disperse more broadly across the entire council area. Now, effectively, this model probably wouldn't be palatable to the companies, given the way that probably their guidelines for community benefit will operate, again, because they see themselves being within the sort of parameters of the project boundary. Equally, the communities that have the renewable infrastructure may not see the distribution of funds across the council area as being equally appropriate. But effectively, those are the sort of two main models that you could try to encourage the companies to take on board. But a third model is to look at potentially a foundation model. And the idea again is that, these companies can still sustain their individual deliverables for their respective benefit plans and programs, but potentially asking them to contribute a percentage of that funding towards a community foundation. And then through that community foundation, those funds can be then allocated more broadly again through our community action planning across the entire council area. So with that model, like I said, they are still having most of their benefit probably being targeted towards the communities that are close to their projects. But by having a foundation, you then have that opportunity to, like I said, benefit the communities that are outside those project areas. So that's the concept that I've been working towards. And I'll be interested to see if councillors feel that it's something that we should try to engage with the companies about. And I said that would be the sort of presentation that I'll be giving. Questions?
Thanks, Gary. I'll just raise a question before I open to the floor. Couldn't you do the fund model with the foundation concept? So have the fund with a percentage still allocated to the individual areas? And then I suppose what's the difference between a foundation and a fund?
Well, the foundation would be setting up, potentially a governance arrangement to how those funds would be allocated. Are you sort of saying, I think in comparison to this one? Yeah,
where you could, I question, and I don't know the benefits of foundation might have tax deductible status, etc. Yeah. You could potentially have the fund with a percentage contribution out of the total funds allocated to each individual area, and then a percentage go into the fund that would go through to the community action plans as well.
Yeah, and that's a possibility too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just probably more the benefits of a foundation versus a fund or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So look, great concept. I think this would deliver better results for our community. Doesn't offset the lack of rateable income coming in from their infrastructure, but it does share potentially the benefits to the whole rate base as well as the individual areas that are impacted. So people's thoughts?
I don't believe these community benefit funds should reach the whole council area. I really disagree with the model too. I like the idea of the community foundation. I think Mid-Murray certainly needs it, but it needs to be totally separate to Mid-Murray. And then you might go with model one and say, hey, but we've got this Mid-Murray community foundation where you might want to put 10% or whatever of that fund to here, and this is what happens. I think the communities that are being altered by these schemes need to benefit, because otherwise you're going to have real mental health problems, and they need to see that they're getting the benefit and other people aren't benefiting from it. That's just what I've seen from my trips around.
Yeah, and if I could add that, I had a chat to, I can't remember his name, Gary from Tilt.
Owen.
Oh, thank you as well. And they and other renewables companies do collaboration with each other in other areas. So it's not a novel concept to them, which is great. I tend to agree with Simone's view. And I think that we should perhaps look on it. I think it's a great idea, but I think we should perhaps look on it as that frees up some of our funds potentially for the areas that are not benefiting in that way, you know, particularly in the area maybe of mental health support, though I know, Simone, you're talking about the effect of actually being close to one of those facilities. But it, you know, if we looked at it more as so we don't have to worry so much about that bit, because that bit's being covered by these companies, and we can then address our funds more effectively to the areas that are not benefiting.
Sorry, Mandy, I'm just somewhat confused where are those funds coming from that we would use to benefit the other areas? Well,
I mean, it depends what it's spent on, but obviously we have a strategic plan, a community plan, and if some of that is covered in some of the sections, the regions, then our focus for any other money that comes our way, grants or whatever, can be on the other regions that are not benefiting from this project, because we're saying that it wouldn't be a holistic fund for all of Mid-Murray. So there'll be regions that don't benefit because they're not near one of these facilities. So it just will save us money from our general coffers, I suppose, if there are things that if we get other monies to spend on, or even money we have now to spend on the regions that are not going to benefit.
Yeah. So what, Mandy, you're saying is effectively, we would target, you know, our spending on these regions here that are outside project locations.
Yeah.
So implementing the community development strategy, we can partner with the renewables in delivery of the strategy in these 4 regions, but we would have to find alternative resources to fund initiatives in these other regions. That's what you're suggesting.
Yep.
Bailey, one of the questions then on your comments is, I think, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, we're finding, let's say there's a concentration in certain areas where these facilities are being built, and so there could be significant funds invested into that area, which may be surplus to the needs potentially. And I think, Gary, the concept was to try to spread some of those funds, because there's only so many things potentially you could do in, you know, certain areas.
Yeah, well, you can clearly see, you know, the Palmer Tunkillo Manum, you know, it has its lion's share of renewable projects. If they all got up, you know, there will be a significant amount of money, you know, in this southern portion of the council area.
But I see that as no different to if we get a targeted grant given to us for certain cohort of the population. You know, that there are always restrictions on the way we can spend money. We will always get grants that are not broadly targeted to whatever we want to spend it on. So there's always those parameters, Ben.
Sure. Jeff.
I just wanted to say that I agree with what Simone said earlier, that the communities that are in the direct vicinity get the lion's share, but I'd also like to see a portion of it go to the broader community, because the whole broader community, in my opinion, is being disadvantaged by missing out on the rate revenue from those facilities. So, yeah, I'd just like to see a percentage of the funding going to the whole district, with the lion's share of it going to those specific areas. That's my thoughts.
So that effectively is what the third model is trying to do. Because whatever that percentage contribution would be something that would be negotiated with each of the companies, but the lion's share would still be working through the individual community benefits that those companies have. So, you know, looking at, you know, an example of what we saw last week, you know, Tilt Renewable looking to break their contribution across 4 different programs. at a different percentage rate. You know, that totals 100%. What we would be asking is, could 1 or 2% be taken from each of those pools of funds towards that foundation model, which can then be allocated more broadly. So I wouldn't be, we wouldn't necessarily be asking, the companies to, hive off a high percentage of their contribution, but, a small percentage.
Councillor Schulz?
My concern with the concept of the community foundation is that percentage that's left over, that the areas that are impacted by the facilities, receive, that community foundation percentage is probably more likely going to go to the areas with the greatest population concentration, and the little people will miss out again.
Well, that could be managed if on the parameters you put around the distribution of those funds, but yes, it's something that would need to be considered. Any other elected members want to make any comments?
Yeah, I'd having been at the Tilt session, it was very interesting to look at the scale of the investment, I suppose, for the community benefit scheme, and how they were quite flexible as to how that money was going to be divvied up in conversation with the community. So I would assume that there'll be those same conversations with each of the energy providers with the community, and some agreements that have come to. There did seem to be a little bit extra left over that they discussed maybe going into more community outside of the community's parts that are affected. But, if how it would benefit is that it would mean that the communities that were affected would not probably need as much of the community grant money to be divvied back to them. So some of the community grant monies would go to the areas that aren't impacted by that. So that's how I would see it, as not a trade-off, but that fund that we would have in there, it would still be dispersed, but it probably wouldn't need to be dispersed into the areas that have the energy regulation there. So that's just my thoughts.
Sorry, any other comments or feedback?
I just think it's well worth pursuing, Gary.
Look, I think it won't harm having a conversation to start the conversation and see where it lands. The companies, are all going to sort of want to, have their views about what how their schemes operate. As we saw last week with Tilt, the other companies have made preliminary, suggestions that they'll be making, conversations with their communities in the next few months as they progress. So yeah, like I said, I think it's just worthy of having a conversation with them as to how we can all collaborate.
Thanks, Gary. Are there any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item?
I guess the only thing we need to be really aware of is that we're not looking like we're coming to take funds from community, because I think that's how it may be seen. So it's just about setting it up really clearly about what we're going to do, how we're going to engage with that community. We're not just taking the funds, we're going to talk to you and we're going to make sure that it benefits you.
Yeah. And look, part of the conversation could be, this could be on top of the community development funds, Gary. I'm not sure whether they want to give us more money, but yeah, I'm very mindful that we don't want to be seen to taking the money, and it would be about additional stuff potentially.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's about, it's not about taking the money. I think it's about, broadening the community of benefit, so that they, because at the end of the day, we as we've spoken, about how, they're not paying rates. It's how, this money is then being allocated towards, projects more broadly than just those communities that benefit.
And Tilt, for example, have proposed that there is a portion of funding above the Community Development Fund that they would be willing to look at council. So, look, I think it's worth exploring, and obviously we'll progress, get some feedback from the actual companies, Gary, and then we'll come back to council with that.
I think Victoria had something she wanted to say.
Oh, thanks there, Jeff. Something that I wanted to say was, yeah, really just that I agree that it's a great plan. I do believe that we should be thinking definitely first and foremost over those communities that are being affected by the infrastructures surrounding it, and that the pool of money going to us could be going to definitely broad spectrum community initiatives like, say, the Reconciliation Action Plan and things that we may have put on hold financially in our strategic plan that are going to be of benefit to the whole Mid-Murray region. So then those areas that are still being affected will feel like it's benefiting their community as well as the greater outer region of areas, I think, is kind of my feeling of like, we're going to have some funds go. I'd like to see them to go to more sort of mental health, obviously, but community things that are bringing more positive stuff to our community after we've just been sort of quite strict with all the cutting back of services and things because of financial pressures. I'd like to see us be able to give a little bit back, and then that would feel like those smaller areas that are just outside the region, like say Sedan and Canberra and those little smaller pockets that aren't going to be benefiting from the infrastructure, then feel that they're still getting a slice of the community benefits overall. But I guess we can discuss that when it all happens, when we see coins.
Thank you, Councillor Hammond. Any other comments? No, thank you, Gary. Good presentation. Dave, transport strategy.
Not change. Changing. Okay. Thanks, Ben. This is more so about logging projects for the future in the MRLGA road transport strategy. Obviously, not all the projects are ever funded, but what we're looking at doing is seeking external funding and having projects listed in the net and the transport strategy, not only under special local roads, but whatever options there are available. Yep. So the strategy basically provides for a strategic road network right across the whole of the MRLGA region, and all councils put in their road network based on freight, social and tourism, and all those areas are weighted, and those projects they're put through a weighting score, and then they're awarded a level of criteria and priority. Most of the projects we put in are for special local roads, but what we've asked for this time is to put in roads for even bridges, any other projects that may be under the heavy vehicle freight routes, or any other options that may become available. So the purpose of today is really to list off some of the key projects that we're looking at. We've obviously been successful in the Murraylands Road, Udunda Road. We're in the part process of doing Murraylands Road through SLRP on a 2 to 3 year term, which remains an ongoing project because it is a state recognised freight transport route. Now we want to put forward all the other projects that we seem to believe that would meet the criteria, and it's not a wish list to be able to put things in. It's more so there are criteria that is mapped towards how it's all played out. Next slide. So looking at the strategic roads that are used in our area for predominantly freight and social and tourism. Whilst I've got a list here of 2 pages of road works, doesn't actually mean they'll make it on the list, but it'll actually put it on there as a key project leading into the future. And the future might still be 10, 15, 20 years away. But we just want to make sure that we get our projects listed so that we're in the realm for whenever we wish to fund them. So looking at the Murraylands, Blanchetown, Morgan, including heavy vehicle route, that's in the project and the strategy now. That is now coming to an end after the 2 to 3 year program that we've got funded now. The next road is a gap between the Stott Highway and the Angus Valley Road. We've got a 7K gap there where the majority of the road still except for 7Ks. So we're looking at listing that in the list, and this is not This is not on a priority basis. This is just a common list. Mount Mary Road, looking at between Teeley Highway to just southbound through the town to protect the town through the freight movements that go down to Mount Mary Road, and looking at obviously getting some traction on that portion of the road. A lot of our issues are from now we have heavy vehicles, BWs driving on our other roads, and our roads were never built to the width they should be. So we've got to practice to build them out to 8 metres wide and 9 metres where corners. So we're looking at Belvedere, Merdco, Morrell Road and Millandella Road as projects, given that Merdco Road, Loxton Waycrease widen their portion of their road and to about 8 or 9 metres, and ours is still about 6 to 7 metres wide. So there's obviously some conflict between the boundaries. Next slide. And just ongoing, obviously we've got the Wombi Road, which is topical at present, which is the DC Corinda East Murray. That is probably a road that's pending, depending on the mine's longevity, but we'd like to put that in. Caton Road, from Stott Highway to the council boundary, that's heading south from Caton. It comes as a bit of a transport route for livestock. So looking at, hopefully in conjunction with the Barossa Council, that's TBC, at looking at doing a widening at some stage. Pelican Point Road, Pelican Point shack area qualifies because of the amount of shacks that are in the area for a tourism and social area. So that is a project that would be pending. Black Hill Road, we've obviously got a bridge deficiency on Black Hill Road, and similar around St Kitts, we've got a St Kitts Bridge and also the Dutton settlement. There's quite a few freight movements that move through Dutton, through the St Kitts Road. And Mark's Landing, we've spoken about the bridge upgrade, and then currently we've got a project which is being funded through the LRCIP, the Caton Road Stott Highway to the council boundary. So they're the list of roads we're looking at putting in. I've raised those with the MRLGA at present, and they're probably our key projects that we would like to include in the strategy for future consideration. So is there any questions?
Dave, Mayor Thorley's been quite strong on that he believes that Blackheath Road at Rockley should be included. Your thoughts on that?
When you start looking at Wombi Road and Blackheath Road, they're very long roads and they're very high distance and high valued roads to build. Blackheath's about 26.5 k's long. It is actually deemed as a shortcut, so people can use Mount Torrens into Tunky, down through Palmer and then down Reedy Creek. So a lot of people do use that road through Blackheath as a shortcut, and there are some freight operators that do use that road. To use that as a common freight route, we'd probably like to keep them onto the state roads, but unfortunately they don't. So Blackheath Road would be a very heavy commitment for this council, but that we can put that in the equation, and then obviously that gets met with your criteria to see if it will get a ranking in the list of orders on the road network. So we can include it, and that would be considered.
So 26 kilometres, is that our part? Did Murray Bridge also have some?
No, the first, I think, 1 kilometre is in Adelaide Hills, and then we have about 26.5 kilometres all the way down to Reedy Creek for Blackheath Road.
Any other questions or comments or things that you might suggest be included for consideration?
I'm just wondering, since we're looking at a road into a shack settlement for a tourism thing, what's the road conditions with at Bow Hill with the post flood and everything like that? Would that be a road that would benefit? I mean, it doesn't go to anywhere, but Pelican Point doesn't go to anywhere. And there's an awful lot of shack people. I'm just asking a question. Is that one that we would look at as well, and the condition of it?
From a social perspective, the road's already sealed all in Bow Hill, leading down to Providence Drive. So all those roads are actually in a sealed capacity. So there wouldn't be any probably requirement for an upgrade. The only thing would be renewal, which would come out, which doesn't form part of the funding criteria through the network. The only proportion of the Weber Road, I think it is, which would probably quantify, is from Bow Hill Engineering to the Hunter Highway, because they do some fairly large structures, there may be some requirements for intersection upgrades, but only from the freight movements which move in from Bow Hill. The rest of the roads are all sealed, so predominantly there wouldn't be any further upgrades required in Bow Hill. The Pelican Point, there's well over, I think, from memory, about 70 to 80 shacks at Pelican Point, and there's other shacks in there as well. There's been a fairly large demand and I suppose road usage of that area. It does qualify as a social road and a tourism road, which doesn't rank as highly as a freight road. And then that would then probably come out in the rankings through the road order right across the region. So it may not even rank real high in comparison to, say, a widening of Morrell Road or something along those lines.
Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise one thing. We've discussed before, or I've discussed before with Dave about East Front Road, Canberra, how it's not likely that's ever going to get reopened again. If that remains the case, where Baker's Hut Road joins onto Hunter Road, that section of Hunter Road is 110k speed limit, and the T-junction there is actually tighter than a 90-degree bend. It's like a 120-degree corner. It's a very tight corner. So I'm wondering if that intersection, if East Front Road is not going to be reopened, is there a possibility of that intersection being reviewed to make it safer for vehicles coming out? Because just down on the downstream side of that intersection, on the mountain side, it's very close to a blind corner in 110k speed limit. So, and vehicles have to slow right down to like 25, 30 k's an hour to take that bend because it is so sharp. So I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of that intersection being reviewed if East Front Road is not going to be reopened.
Through that, I can raise that with DIT because Hunter Road is actually a DIT road, and they look after the interface of the junctions between it. Now, whether they look at funding it through them or see it as a priority, but from an initial point of view, I can actually raise that with DIT now just to have a review of that junction because that's actually their interface with that road. So we may be able to look at other revenues from that one.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If I can't see you, I apologise. No, thank you, Dave. So we'll go on to the last presentation, which is the Remuneration Tribunal's review of minimum and maximum CEO remuneration. There's a slide deck. You make that full screen, Carol, please. Just the arrow down the... Yeah. There you go. Thank you. So onto the next slide, please, Carol. As you would be aware, the Remuneration Tribunal did an initial review of the remuneration of LGA local government CEOs in 2023, and they had a determination at that point. They've committed to doing a more thorough review because that was limited at that time, and they've undertaken that over the last 12 months, and a draft determination has been released on the 20th of January 25 for comment. The draft determination proposes a number of changes around the definition of remuneration and the new remuneration bands that will be considered potentially by, or that the different councils will fit into. And there's a number of impacts on how councils are managing their CEO remuneration as part of that, including some that would be paying potentially more than the band they fit into, and some that would be paying less than the bands that they fit into, and they would then need to ensure that over a period of time that the bands were applied for. Next slide, please, Carol. So this is an area where they've defined the remuneration to be included in the total remuneration package, is what they determine. And there's a list of items there, including base salary, superannuation, annual leave lighting, any additional leave entitlements, bonuses, motor vehicle. And motor vehicle costs would include private use value and FBT, housing allowances and other fees and allowances like memberships, subscriptions, potentially childcare, depending on how individual councils have packaged their remuneration up. The most significant one for regional councils, doesn't impact ours, is the housing allowances, housing allocations. So certain councils such as Karoonda East Murray include a house to try to attract some talent or a CEO. And that hasn't necessarily been included previously, but any benefit from that would now be included, which could potentially reduce the amount that they can offer. And I think Simone will share some feedback on feedback from other councils that she's received as part of this process. The one that does impact ours, noting that it is mine, is additional leave, which is a non-cash benefit, and that hasn't been included previously. Under the new definitions of remuneration, that would be included as part of the total remuneration package. Next slide, please, Carol. So the new remuneration bands. So there's, I think, been an objective from the tribunal to try to reduce the number of bands or increase the number of councils that are in individual bands. For example, there are some anomalies, like Adelaide City Council has its own band, and then there's others that there's only one or two councils in that. The consideration, so the first review was based solely on current remuneration. And so there was a number of flaws, and you would remember that we put a submission in saying that remuneration considerations are much more complex than that, and couldn't be or shouldn't be based just merely on the current packages. The changes are primarily based on council's operating revenue, which wasn't considered previously, with some secondary considerations around projected population growth, population dispersion, distance from Adelaide, and socio-economic advantage and disadvantage. And this is all included in the letter and the draft that was provided with the agenda for the briefing. Probably a comment that is that the items there that have been used to base the bands on fail to consider other factors, complexities of roles, and, for example, performance. So there's some limitations that the sector feels that should be considered, and it shouldn't be just based on potentially operating revenue, potentially population, and a number of other different factors about the complexity of the business. Next slide. So the impact on MMC and other councils, depending where the CEOs fall within the bands. As I said, some have had their bands dropped by up to 50,000. Others have been less than that, and others will need to pay their current CEO additional funds, because there's some examples where, given the criteria that's now been assessed, the bands have changed by 2 or 3, so they'll be required to pay more money. The Remuneration Tribunal is proposing that this be, if you are outside the band, that you will have either, if it's less than $5,000, need to comply within 12 months. If it's over 5,000, you have 2 years to comply with the proposed bands. For those CEOs like myself that are on an existing contract and was on an existing contract prior to the initial determination being made, they don't comply. They don't have to comply with the bands until a new contract is signed. And that's because those contracts were already existing in existence, prior to the initial determination. One of the complexities that is presented is different calculations of total remuneration package, and some councils have done it differently. The main consideration around that is the private use of vehicles and the FBT components around that, and which method is used to calculate the additional benefit to individual CEOs. There's legal implications as well. For example, there's scenarios where councils have recruited for a new CEO in recent times, based their remuneration package on the current bands, so the ones that have been set by the tribunal. And now with the proposed changes, those CEOs no longer fit within those bands. And some of those are significantly different. So you've got an employment contract that's signed in good faith based on the information from the tribunal that was in place, and now those bands have changed. There's also examples where the changes in remuneration in some of those councils that have been affected significantly by the change of criteria, where the general managers and the directors would be receiving more remuneration than the CEO because those wages aren't set by the Remuneration Tribunal. Unfortunately, not the case in our council. As the directors, I'm sure, are smiling at that, but there is an example of a council where the band would be lower than the remuneration, and those directors and general managers have an employment contract in place, and so they aren't dictated by any changes to that. One of the other scenarios, and Simone might touch on this, is the cost of recruitment, where there's examples with, say, some medium-sized metropolitan councils where they're going to have to, if the bans come in place, reduce their current salary offerings, and there's costs associated with recruiting new staff, whether that's the CEO or any staff member, and the IP potentially that exists before that staff member, on top of the hard costs of actually recruiting, paying a recruitment company and an independent person, which we have to do from a legislative perspective. So there's a number of issues and considerations involved in this. Next slide, please, Carol. So as you would have seen from the documents that were provided, submissions to the tribunal are being called by the 12th of March. Relatively tight turnaround, and there's concerns, even though they took 12 months to do their first review or the review of this, and then give us a month basically, or just over, that it is a bit of a fait accompli, and there's concern from the sector around that, and the LGA are taking legal advice on the implications of the proposals. There's opportunity for a council submission. The LGA are doing a sector-wide submission and are asking for feedback, whether that is just the council submission or additional information for them to consider as part of this process. And then there's other considerations that may be required. So the next point is discussion. And I think, Simone, you've got some comments or feedback.
Yeah, I'm just going to read some of the emails that I've received in the last few days. So the president of the LGA sent all of the mayors an email saying, hey, we'd like your thoughts on this, but also put something through to the tribunal. And so I'll just read some of the mayors' concerns, and especially regional mayors. The first one says, any remuneration package which effectively reduces pay of a council CEO with no reference to performance is likely to lead to significant turnover in CEOs. It's an expensive exercise to go through the recruitment process, the orientation and the performance management of a CEO. So I think that's around about 30 to 50,000, depending on who you go through. The challenges are increasing year by year. There's no doubt that varying levels of responsibility, competence and experience throughout the sector, and that's the biggest concern for me with minimum. You know, Ben's on what he is because he has 6 years experience and he's been rewarded when he's done a good job. If there's a minimum and we start a CEO with no experience on the minimum, then and they don't deserve that, then how are we going to reward them? I'd like people to get there with experience. This council says they have a CEO who's performed consistently above expectations and have a strong focus on financial sustainability. So what benefits to ratepayers if they have to find alternative employment because they get a significant cut in pay? Then I have lots of emails from regional mayors. This mayor says, we're in the process of recruiting our 6th CEO in 11 years, not where we want to be, and money has not been the reason we've failed to attract suitable candidates. They're a level 5 council with less than 2,000 constituents. You can't compare it with bigger councils. They need consistency, they need flexibility, this is really going to put them in a hard place. Another one says CEO remuneration has and always will be comparable with any senior management positions in the private sector. In my 3 terms of local government, I've experienced 3 different CEOs. The current remuneration of each CEO has always attracted a large number of very well qualified, capable people. To increase the cost of a CEO just because another state has a different model is totally unnecessary. This mayor here says we're in the same situation as other rural councils. We're trying to manage costs. We have the added disadvantage of being very close to the CBD, like Mid-Murray, which makes retention of staff and CEO very hard to do when big dollars are being offered by neighbouring councils. The idea of different bands will go some way to help this, but not one size fits all. Another very small council who's currently looking at a new CEO. They now have to move from band 8 to band 7. They've just farewelled their CEO and appointing a new one, which won't commence until 8 weeks. As a small council, we're restricted by money and we have available in our budget for possible further negotiations. I think decisions will have wide ramifications for councils and ask that you and the LGA consider the immediate effect this will have on budgets, recruiting and rates, as it's from weights that the CEO's wage is funded. Explaining rate increases to cash-strapped ratepayers in the midst of a dreadful drought and economic uncertainty is not a walk in the park. And the last one is, I note that the 2023 determination, our council was in band 7, has gone from a minimum of 235 and a maximum of 265 down to a proposed minimum of 207 to a maximum of 246. This is a drop in nearly $20,000. It's difficult enough to recruit in the country and retain good CEOs, and being forced to drop the remuneration will inhibit council recruiting. So there's sort of some of the thoughts of my peers. Smaller regional councils, probably not ours as much, but some councils you don't have, great directors and things like our council does. So the CEO needs to be a jack of all trades, and they're basically really lowering those councils' ability to get a decent CEO, but their expectations of that CEO are like crazy. Anyone's thoughts?
Do you know what the rationale has been to actually consider reducing the remuneration?
Well, like Ben said, the first one was just basically done on what the CEO was on at the time, and that's where I became most concerned, because Ben was on a good wage because of the experience and what he'd done during the flood and all that kind of stuff, and then we have to bring in a new CEO at that same rate where they won't be performing to that level. So then they've gone back and done a check on, oh look, maybe if you've got this income and this many population, and so now they're bringing some of the councils that they thought were overpaying down to what it should be for the population, but it doesn't cover all bases.
So to answer your question, Mandy, to expand on Simone, basically the system they started with was flawed, and they were told they should use a number of criteria, and they didn't. And now they've tried to come up with some criteria to try to adjust their original bandings, and that's caused some challenges. And my position is they haven't considered enough criteria to be really accurate as well as the things that Simone have suggested. And some, I will say, some councils, not ours, have jumped a number of different bands, 2 or 3 up. And so they're saying that you should be remunerating up to X amount of dollars more as well. So it's not just down, there's ups and downs.
So do we need to give some feedback on what we think the appropriate criteria would be? Yeah, so I can share our previous submission that Simone and I submitted, or was submitted by council. Council approved it, which included all the criteria that we thought are in there. And I think that still stands, Simone.
Yeah.
Depending on what the feedback is from council here, we would provide a report to the next council meeting, because we'd want council to endorse, or council would need to endorse any submission that was made. To get the, what should be considered as part of this process.
So will that report be updated to cover some of the things that you weren't aware of when you did the first report or response?
That would be the intent, yes.
Yeah. Sounds a good idea.
And I think there was one comment that I heard from the sector where at the moment it's based on turnover. And so, you know, a CEO could drive an opportunity to increase revenue for the council in the short term, because that would impact their potential salary, and they could be involved in that, which would be a good thing for the region, but then there would be a conflict of interest. And so they'd have to remove themselves from that process. So it sort of defeats in some way, you know, some of the KPIs or what would be good for the region. So there's a number of considerations.
An example of that is, you know, we've just received the $1.5 million grant. We've got our $1.1 million Play Our Way. We've had our growth. We have some, just say we're getting flood recovery. That will all increase our income, and Ben will get paid on that, whether he does the work on that or not. I really believe that CEO's pay should be performance-based.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, yeah, the criteria isn't accurate.
Just two comments. I don't know where this sort of fits in. Are they addressing like the challenges for CEOs of councils? Because I do notice that there's such a big turnover in some councils, and it sort of seems to be that it's not as they expected it to be, or because it's like there's no hard and fast playbook, I suppose. Each council is different as to the challenges within it. Are they looking at how they can support CEOs with the CEO retention to also go into balance with this at all?
This is just the tribunal on wages, but I do believe this is bringing up a bigger issue on how the LGA should be supporting CEOs and especially regional councils and mayors and elected members. So the discussions have already come up in SAROC, and when I called the president of LGA to talk about something else. So yeah, I would say that will be discussed.
Yeah, and I think actually there's three things now, because it just did another one. A really big education piece to the community on CEOs. We already know that we get a lot of pushback, feedback, noise about, you know, wages and sort of stuff like that, and it's horrific sometimes. The commentary around that is that the education around, you know, why CEOs are paid, what the understanding. I think it'd be really, LGA need to do a really big education piece. I know that's just not tribunal, but it's another thing. The third one is, does it take into account the like all the ESCOSA findings? So when you've got a potentially unsustainable community, where does that leave you? Where you're trying to claw back savings, and then if you were in a band that was in a really high band, that to me just sort of, I'm just wondering how that works.
Yeah, I am a strong believer that there shouldn't be a minimum. You know, just give a maximum if that's what you want to do to, you know, make it look like you're trying to keep CEOs at a level to help with that community education. But I do believe by having this determination, at least we can come back and say, hey, our CEO's paid within the band, you know, so that will help with that community education, but we've got to get the band right.
So very mindful of time. Councillor
Close.
Yeah, I was a bit confused about the socio-economic status. Like, it sort of seemed like a bit of a catch-22 situation. If a council has got a low socio-economic status overall, that makes the CEO's job harder. I get that, but it also ups the score so that it raises the potential. It creates possibility that the CEO's package will go, pay package will go to the next band up, but that creates a difficulty with the low socio-economic ratepayers in that council to fund that. It's just a bit of a oxymoron or whatever we call it. Yeah, I couldn't get my head around that one.
Thanks, Roz. Any other comments? Mindful I'm 20 minutes over. Yes.
Just a quick comment, just a quick question. You said earlier in one of the slides that one of the things that would likely affect this council is the additional leave entitlements. I'm just wondering if you could clarify what the additional leave entitlements would actually be.
Sorry, what was the specific?
You mentioned about additional leave entitlements in one of the slides earlier, and you said that's potentially something that may affect this council. I'm just wondering if you could clarify what that may be.
So previously, I have additional leave as part of a negotiated package for when I didn't receive a increase. I think it was during COVID. And previously that hasn't been incorporated in total remuneration package because it wasn't a non-cash benefit. Now it's been very clear that that would be included in the total remuneration package. So that would increase that package and then would create further issues from a BAM perspective in our perspective. So no other comments or questions on that. So we'll draft up a submission that'll come to council. But if you have any specific feedback to inform that submission, that would be well received. Thank you on that. That's the end of the presentation. Mayor Bailey, do you have anything else to add?
No, nothing from me.
No, thank you. KPI failed. I'm 22 minutes over time. Apologise to everyone, especially on a hot day. Thank you for your contributions. Any other comments from the directors? No. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Keep cool.